Okay, hey, welcome in. My name is Julia Greip. I'm going to be talking about safe words for brave spaces. I'm getting help recording this from a studio in Studiefrämjandet, and Johannes Axner and Karin Edman is helping me. And Karin will be checking out the chat and noting some questions that I will be taking in the end of this talk. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them, and she will ask them to me in the end, and I will reply as best as I can. But for now, let's get on to the slides, I think. Or should we let people trickle in? Are people inside? Yeah, let's go. So, slide 2, please. Before talking about the safe words, we need to talk about what do I mean with a brave space. And this part is very much inspired by the article written by Anneli Friedner about her views on brave spaces. And she explains it rather well that when we talk about safe spaces, we talk about safety from things. We don't want to have in a safe space, you don't want to have things that are triggering. You don't want to experience uncomfortable and unsafe things. So you want to be safe from those things. But in LARPs, as wonderfully portrayed by this picture, we don't only want to have the cozy and nice and wonderful experiences. We also want the challenging, the sometimes painful, the changing experiences. And to be able to do that, we need a brave space where we are safe to do things, where we can explore our boundaries, where we can trust in ourselves, trust in our co-players, to really get into those challenging themes. And through discussions with Anneli, I've also sort of realized that brave space can be something within yourself, that you go to your brave space, that is when you step out of your comfort zone. But it can also be sort of an ensemble feeling and culture that you together create a brave space. And this talk, I think, concerns both those parts, both the brave space within yourself and as an ensemble together with the co-players at the LARP. But basically what I'm going to talk about is how can you create and design that enhance the brave space of the game, where you can trust that yes, a no means no, but a yes means yes, where we trust each other that we want this kind of play, we want to be challenged, and we only want the safe words to back out when it gets too much, not to ask always, is this okay? Is this fine? Is this good? Because sometimes we risk creating a culture where we are a bit too anxious not to ever step out of line, not to challenge ourselves, and sometimes we might want to trust in each other that yes, okay, we are here to be challenged and we want to do this together. So that is the idea that I want these safe word designs to be for, not all safe word designs. And we go on to slide 3. So this talk is more of a think piece, more my personal ideas and views of this, and less of an universal truth that works for all LARPs. And it's mainly suitable for LARPs that are more challenging, more in the brave space where you challenge yourself and go out of your comfort zone. So it's not a way to design all LARPs or all for all players. And this talk only concerns safe words and gestures that sort of correlate to safe words, and not all kinds of safety mechanics. And when I say safe words, I basically mean words and gestures that that calibrate the playstyle intensity, that say up it a bit, or dial it down, or pause entirely. So it's about the intensity of the scene that is going on. That is what I mean with safe words. To be able to do this, let's go on to slide 4, which is a basically that I will be talking about a typology of safe words. And that's for us to have a common set of terms so we know what we're talking about. And I was searching a bit when researching this, and I didn't really find a covering typology, so I have made one up myself from scratch, basically. You might agree or disagree, we'll see. We go on to slide 5. First of all, we need an overall typology of the kinds when it comes to how, what was the word we said before? The volume of the safe word, how intrusive, how noticeable is it? We have diegetic safe words that are things that your character says, that you as a player also say, but with an underlying meaning of a safe word. So to the other characters, there's only a sentence, but the players will also hear, but you use a safe word. That also has the meaning of we should dial it up or dial it down. Then we have non-diegetic things that are not said at all by the character, but said by you as a player. Those are the most noticeable, which are good to use when things are very out of hand and you really need to hey, whoa, now we need to really step it down. And then we have the discrete kind, which is not diegetic. So it's not a thing that your character does, but you do as a player, but it's not very noticeable. So other people all around you might not even notice you doing this, but in the scene, the co-player might notice that you, okay, you did this signal to me, so I should dial it up or dial it down. And now we go on to next slide, slide 6. I also need to just quickly explain what I mean with breaking a scene. That is when a scene is going on and you want to end that scene and get out of it so it doesn't continue for you. It might continue afterwards, so the other players in the scene continue playing that scene without you, or they might just break it up and go find scenes somewhere else. So basically it is when that specific thing that is going on with the people that are in it pauses or completely ceases. Next slide, slide 7. So the first kind is the de-escalating kind. For example, we often use brems in Nordic countries. I've also read that largo is used in some countries. Inspired by the BDSM scene, I think. You can use yellow as a sort of like a traffic light. And the function of these words are lowering the intensity of the play, but you don't want to break the scene. So if someone is in my face and shouting at me, I might want them to continue doing that, but not quite as loudly, not quite as much in my face. Just dial it down a notch. And the examples I mentioned, brems, largo, yellow, they're all non-diegetic. I say it as player, my character doesn't say it. But there are also examples of diegetic safe words. For example, inside Hamlet, the use of pure, which means dial it down. So for example, I can say, hey, my heart is pure. And people understand that that is not just my player or my character wanting to get out of being suspected. That is also me showing that I'm a bit uncomfortable with the intensity right now. And there's a special case of this, which is the case of the here but not further. And what this is that you can use just the same kinds of words as in the examples above. But, okay, this is dial it down a notch. It means, this is good. I don't want you to escalate any further. Just keep it on this level and we are good. And that is something that I think is a bit problematic, a bit difficult, at least for the brave space kind of play. And we'll get back to that further into the talk, why that is a problem. So next we have slide 8, the discontinuing kind. And the function of these are to break the scene temporarily. And either you can get out of it or you can continue it after explaining what is wrong. And it might be because you have injured yourself, it can be because you are very uncomfortable, or just any reason that you might want to completely pause the scene or end it. Cut is very often used. Red is used a bit. That's the main examples I've been able to find. Next up, we have slide 9, the escalating type, where you want to dial up the intensity of the scene. And that is, of course, not a demand. You can't say, we are going to escalate this scene, but you can say and signal to your co-players that I would be very happy and interested in escalating this scene if you want to. And green is a common word for this, again with the traffic lights. There's also the gesture of scratching that I know has been used at Baphomet, which is basically you take your hand and you scratch your co-player to show that, yes, this is comfortable. If you want to escalate, I'm fine with that. And green, of course, is a non-diegetic word. The scratching is a discrete gesture because no one else can notice you doing it but your co-player. And then we also have the diegetic words used in sentences. For example, at Inside Hamlet, we have rotten used. And we go on to slide 10. And this is a bit special. The check-in is a question where all the others are saying what I want. And that is mainly used if you are unsure if your co-player is okay and comfortable, and it might be you just don't really seem okay, or it can be, I'm about to do this. You okay? And one example is asking green. Another example is asking color, and so the other person will reply with the color they feel. Of course, when you answer or when you ask green, you can get yes, no, or you can get green, or perhaps yellow, red. And there's also using gestures. And I think that it is asked by showing an okay sign, and then you want your co-player to either respond with a thumbs up, thumbs down, or in between. And of course, an in between is also treated usually as a no, because you don't want to try something if you're not sure if your co-player wants it. And then finally, we have, next slide, the flexible. And this is when you're not only interested in saying dial up, dial down, or end completely, but you want to convey something. Perhaps you're very fine with the scene, you really enjoy it, but you might want to tell people that you have glasses and they are brittle, so please be mindful of those, or whatever it is you want to convey to be able to be comfortable and trust in the scene. An off game is very often used for this, and it comes rather naturally to most people to say, off game, be careful with my nose, or I have a broken leg, or whatever it might be. And it's also common in some cultures to use gestures, for example, the fist above the head, or you can sort of make a T with your hands to show that what I'm saying now is off game. You should listen to the message, and then we continue playing. And then next slide, slide 12. We have the avoiding, and this is a bit borderline on safe words, but it is to avoid engaging in play or backing out of play, but without having to use a safe word. You just sort of slide out of it. For example, we have the look down gesture, where you just put your hand like this to show that, no, I don't want to get dragged into this, or no, I'm just gonna slide out of this. Don't play on my leaving or not engaging. And there's also diegetic terms that are usually bespoke for the Larp. For example, Conscience used battery low, used by androids to sort of show that, no, I don't want to be in this scene, but I'm doing it as a robot, showing that my battery is low. And also, the other servants will do it, used by servants at Fairweather Manor, which is a way to say, no, I'm not going to do that, but I'm not saying no because I'm playing a servant and you are noble. Let's move on to the next slide, because that was all of the different types of safe words. Okay, so what kinds of situations call for safe words? And they're sort of ordered in level of how acute they are, so to speak. The first is, I am seriously triggered, I am injured, I am panicking, basically all the situations that are like, no, I cannot continue playing, we need to pause right now. The next level is, I'm feeling uncomfortable. It might be slight discomfort, like, yeah, okay, I could go through with this, but I don't really want to. Or it could be high levels of discomfort. Next up is my co-player really okay? You can see this picture that I chose of Miriam having this 1,000-yard stare where you can feel like either this is a player having a really, really intense anxiety scene, or it is a player who is not comfortable and who is really in a bad space and needs to be checked in on. And for those situations, or also if someone is frightened and crying and you're standing over them, threatening them and feeling, is this real crying? Because in that case, I should really stop, or they're just having the time of their lives and really enjoying the scene, and you need to check in on that. And finally, the least important, but still at sometimes important, is when you feel like, yeah, but I would really enjoy it if my co-player bumped up this scene a notch. And what isn't on this list, is important to note, is I don't think it's necessary for most games to always check in whatever you do. If there's a baseline for the Larp, for example, that you should be comfortable with receiving a slap or with having someone pat you on the head, you shouldn't have to check in before doing those things. You should trust that the co-player in that specific situation, if they're not comfortable, will back out if they're not comfortable at that time. So this is the baseline of what I think that you need safe words for. Next slide, we're at 14. Basically, what happens when you get triggered, when you get scared, when you get injured, all those situations where you really need a safe word and maybe even need to break the scene completely. What happens inside of you is basically that you get more stupid. You get sort of a tunnel vision. You have a hard time formulating words. You have a hard time coming up with a plan on how to solve the situation, and basically just hunker down and endure. And that is, of course, not at all good, because we want you at those situations to use safe words so you can get out of the uncomfortable situation. And we always need to be mindful of that, to design safe words and workshop safe words in a way so that it becomes easy for people to remember them and to use them. And part of that is not having complicated, difficult rules for safe words, and also, of course, to create a good trusting space and a brave space as a player ensemble. And now I'm moving on to that problem I mentioned before with the here but not further. And one of the problems, of course, is that you use it before you're uncomfortable, and that can be good. But it also has a very, it sort of gets both you and your co-player out of your immersion and out of your player chemistry, where you're sort of like feeling and reading each other. Because usually when you hear a de-escalating here but not further, you will react with a, oh, okay, so this is good, but I shouldn't escalate. How can I continue this scene without escalating? What would be good? Is this escalating? Maybe I should just dial it down. And basically, what always happens is that even though it is meant as a, this is good, it will be reacted to as a, oh, I'm dialing it down, which is not what was asked for. And also that the reading, the back and forth between the players is sort of ruined. And people become more tense and not giving into the scene as much as before. So it's much better to use de-escalation that actually means dial it down a notch, but to be safe and to actually use that early on when you're feeling a slight discomfort instead of when you feel completely uncomfortable and perhaps have lost the ability to use safe words. Next, we have the problem with escalating safe words. And this is basically the same problem, that you will usually be a bit brought out of your mind space. You will lose the ability to naturally escalate the way it feels natural, and instead you will be brought completely into your player headspace and feel like, oh, okay, escalation, right. How do I escalate? Do I even want to escalate? How do I want to escalate? And it becomes much more stressful, much less intuitive, and you lose the back and forth between players. And of course, as the one asking for escalation, you will also be a bit unsure. Did they notice that I asked for this? Are they not escalating because they didn't notice or because they don't want to? Maybe I should ask again, but then would that be intrusive and demanding? So both of you sort of lose the natural feel of the scene and become much more in your headspace. The problem with diegetic safe words is, of course, that it's much easier not to notice them if you're really immersed and you're really going into the scene. You can realize after a while, like, oh, shit, you have been using pure a lot of times now, and I've not been noticing that. So you can feel really uncomfortable knowing that you have not responded to someone asking you to de-escalate. And of course, also, being in this uncomfortable mind space, you can have a hard time coming up with a way to use a diegetic safe word in a sentence. For example, using pure isn't always very intuitive if you're feeling a bit scared, a bit uncomfortable. And usually you can also say it just as a word, not in a sentence. But another thing that happens to you when you become uncomfortable and really just can't wrap your head around things is that you don't want to do the wrong thing. You want to be a good LARPer. You want to just not ruin anyone's scene and just survive and go on with your LARP. When of course you maybe shouldn't and should be taking care of yourself instead. And finally, we have the risk with check-in, and this is actually a really big one. And this is mainly because the common way to check in is either asking green or color. And if you're asking someone who is in that specific triggered mind space green, then they will want to do the right thing, the good thing, and say green. And there's a high risk that they do that, even though they might realize afterwards, shit, why did I say green? I didn't want to continue the scene. I was super uncomfortable. And even if they realize that, no, they would like to get out of the scene, you basically give them the word to say. You say green, they will just like a knee-jerk reaction say green. And that might not be the answer they want to give. So asking color is slightly better, but again, there is a pre-given answer. Like the right answer is to say green. And if people are not very aware of their own boundaries and in that headspace of triggered uncomfortableness, there's a high risk. They will just say green because that's the right thing to do. So I think what is much better is to ask off game, how are you doing? Because then you listen to their reply and not only what they say, but how they say it. And we're gonna get back to that in this next slide, which is slide 15. So here are some things that I think are less risky and has some advantages to them. And first out is tap out, which is one of the de-escalating gestures. And that is basically on your co-player or on yourself or on the floor, whatever you have at hand, doing this gesture. Just tapping twice to show that I need you to de-escalate, dial it down, I'm not comfortable. If you have tap out as the given de-escalation technique, then you can always offer people the possibility to, for example, hold the mouth of someone, like in the background picture. If they have their hands free and can tap out and touch your body, you can do scenes like that without being afraid that they will not be able to signal that, no, I don't want this scene anymore. And equally, if you want to hold someone down completely, hold their hands and hold their legs, as long as they have their mouth free and you're checking their face and are in contact with them, then they can say tap out and you can get out of the scene. So if you want really intense play and want players to have a lot of possibilities to make different cruel and oppressive scenes, then tap out is a really good combo. And then we have the advantage of flexible safe words. And to remind you, the flexible safe word is having some sort of word, for example, off game, followed by what you want to tell your co-players. Because usually you're not just generally uncomfortable, you have something very specific that you are uncomfortable with. For example, you might think that someone groping you is fine, but the intense grip they have on your arm, that is uncomfortable. Or again, with the glasses or with an injury or something that you are afraid might get injured, then that is the only concern you have. And apart from that, you might feel that this scene is fantastic and you really just want to continue and see where it escalates. So having a flexible system is, it gives you the opportunity to say, off game, mind this, and then continue the scene. Because when you have signaled that specific thing that you are uncomfortable with or want people to be mindful of, then you can rest easy in the intensity of the scene. And having a flexible safe word also means that you can say, off game, I want to get out of the scene, or basically anything, or just say off game, and people will wait till you have gathered your thoughts and been able to say what is wrong when you get into that sort of triggered and uncomfortable headspace. And actually, I even think that it might be preferable to not have a discontinuing safe word, but instead having flexible safe words as a way to discontinue. But that is more of a choice of yours. And next up, the advantage of the flexible check-in, which is what I was getting into before. Because if you ask green or color, there's a high risk of someone replying with the right choice and not perhaps replying with what they need for their own safety and their own comfort. So by asking, off game, are you okay? Or off game, how are you doing? You might have a co-player that is a bit unsafe and a bit triggered that might be saying, I'm okay. But then if you see that they're a bit shaken, they can't really formulate their words, you might not take that okay as an okay, but hold up, let's see what's going on here. But if they're saying, oh yeah, it's fine, I'm having the time of my life, please continue, then you can rest assured that, yeah, okay, they seem to be generally doing fine. So always listening to how people are saying how they're doing instead of just an okay or a green, I think is much more suited to get the right reply. And finally, for all safe words to work the way they're intended, we always need something called slow escalation, which basically means that you can't just jump at someone or suddenly go up to someone and shove your hand inside their clothes. You need to show what you're going to do. You need to slowly escalate the scene. And you need to give them the opportunity as things slowly progress to show that, okay, here is my limit. Dial it down a bit from here and then we're good. So give people the opportunity to use those when they're only slightly uncomfortable instead of, whoa, what is this? Please stop. Because then they might not be able to find their words when they want to and when they need to. So moving on to the next slide, we have one recipe, a suggestion, not a universal truth, but something that we have been using at, for example, Libertines, which is a game with very many oppressive and difficult scenes. Slow escalation is, of course, the basis which everything stands on. Then we have tap out as words and gesture to de-escalate things when they're going just above what we are comfortable with. We have the flexible, which is saying off game followed by the message, and that can be used both to discontinue a scene or just to say, be careful with this, or I would prefer this, or it can even be used to encourage escalation, like off game. It would be awesome if you undressed me, or similar. And then the only check-in we use is the flexible, that is off game. Are you okay? And that has worked very well, I think. People have been happy with it. I have been happy with it. But of course, always design what works best with your game. This is just a suggestion based on, well, the experiences I've had. We're getting a bit over time, but we have one final slide. And this is about workshopping Safewords. So this is slide 17. This is something we came up for Libertines as well. And it was mainly Simon's design. First off, we touch each other's faces. And that is because we want to get people to use Safewords when they are actually uncomfortable. Usually when you workshop Safewords, you are like, yeah, pretend that you are in an uncomfortable scene, and then at some point you tap out and then it's over. And that doesn't really get people the chance to feel, where is my limit? When am I actually uncomfortable? And by doing this, you get a chance to really feel, how is it to use a safe word when I am uncomfortable? And how is it to have myself pushing until someone uses a safe word? And touching faces sounds very innocent at first, because you might stroke cheeks, you might pat the head, but then you get into the disgusting stuff. You poke your fingers in people's noses, you go into their mouths, and at some point I guarantee you that people might want to consider tapping out at least. Some haven't, most did. And to just have that feeling of like, no, okay, this is too much, really makes a difference and makes people more comfortable using the safe words later in the game. And for the second run of this year's Libertines, we also added a slapping version of this, where you start with a light pat on the cheek. Of course, we started by talking about safe slapping, so people weren't slapping ears. But going from a slight pat and then each time slapping a bit harder until people did tap out to say like, no, okay, that is too intense, that is too hard, that hurt for real. And that is also a good way to get people to build a brave space, which is trusting each other and feeling like, okay, so this is actually how hard I can slap you. This is how it feels for me, this is how it feels for you, and we can just lean into this and be comfortable with it. And that is all. There's some references and a list of pictures in this presentation, but I'm not going to go into that. I think you can look afterwards. So with the minutes we have left, Karin, do you have any questions from the chat?
I have some questions. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so Anders Gridal Burner is asking, could you describe some of the tools in a concrete LARP experience?
I think I did rather well in the end here with Libertines. Does he mean a specific example of a scene or more of a LARP as a whole?
We can circle back to that.
Yes, let's.
His next question is, how do you see when safety from is the only thing used and no mechanics for safety to are present?
I would say that most LARPs these days do not have safety to techniques, apart from the asking people to escalate, because we tend to have focused as a community on becoming more safe, and that I think is awesome. I think that is great and important work that we have been doing, and basically I think that the safety too has been more up to players to feel how they are comfortable and perhaps find the culture of players where they feel safe to do different things. For example, playing with a group where you feel like, yeah, okay, with these people I can really lean into the play I want to have. But I don't think there are many techniques for that apart from the escalation technique. There actually was one technique that I invented for Libertines for this year's run. That is the white ribbon. There will be an article about this someday soon, which is something you tie to your door as a way to ask people that, yes, I would love for you to come into my room and play with me in an oppressive way or in other ways. But that is a way to also invite yourself to be safe, to be unsafe, to have someone barge into your room when you're sleeping or when you're resting, and basically, well, catch you with your guard down. So there are some small techniques, but not that many.
Next question.
Yes.
Kjell Hugas is wondering, when it comes to escalation techniques, I find that they tend to put pressure on the co-player to ramp it up.
Yeah.
For some, it's very hard to not do that because they want to be of service to the one requesting, and they might end up getting pushed beyond their barriers. How do we mitigate this?
That is a great question, and I don't think I have a great answer. But honestly, I think that escalation techniques, like, for example, saying green or saying rotten, isn't very good because, as I said before, you get that headspace where you're confused. Should I escalate? Do I want to escalate? Did they hear my escalation word? All those questions, and basically being brought out of the flow of the game. So I prefer either the discrete gestures, where you, for example, scratch your co-player to just show that this is good. If you want to escalate, you could, because it's less demanding than a word, I find. But also the flexible escalation that I suggest, that is saying, if you want to, you can do this. That is, of course, also demanding, but not, it doesn't demand creativity in the same way, because one problem is that you get someone to ask you to escalate and you feel like, sure, I could, but I'm all out of ideas. It's like when someone says, say something funny, and you totally blank out. In the same way, you will be like, escalate, sure. So if they say, off game, if you want to, you can stick my head in the pool, or you can throw me outside in the mud. That is a concrete suggestion that you might think, do I want to do that? Sure, I could if they want that scene. Or you feel like, no, that's not what I want to do. So it still is demanding, but it doesn't demand creativity. And that, I think, is at least a step and a way. But I don't have a final solution for it. Next up.
Yes. Tobias is wondering, what are some good and bad practices for how to workshop or practice safe words? I'm sure we all have experiences with this, but what are your thoughts?
Well, this one as well was replied a bit in the end. I really like the touching and slapping workshop. And basically, I think it's very good to use as a combined way to practice the things that will be done during the game. If you want to sort of get people, for example, slapping each other, if you want that to be a natural part of the game. Or if there should be a lot of groping or wrestling. Have people actually do that, but also be mindful of, like, do I want people to have pretend boundaries, or do I want them to have real boundaries? And the risk is, of course, that if they are to have real boundaries, then it might be a bit rowdy and it might take a long time because people have different sorts of boundaries. For example, if you have wrestling, you might end up with broken ribs at the workshop. So you really need to think about, like, what do I want people to experience? What do I want people to be comfortable with? And how important is it that they actually listen to their real boundaries? Because if they do that, they might not use the safe words at all during the workshop, and that is a bit counterproductive. And that is the reason I really think it's good to work with disgusting. For example, having someone stick their fingers up in your face and inside your mouth, because most people will be comfortable with that or uncomfortable with that. So at least they get to try using the tap out when they're actually uncomfortable. So that is something that I want people to think of when designing workshops. Next up.
Yes, next question is from Mike.
Hmm?
When you are surprised with a more intense, scary, violent, gropey scene that you'd be willing to play and get agitated, how do you remember to use the safety mechanism instead of just breaking play?
Honestly, I think that since for me slow escalation is such a vital part to making Safewords work, which means that if you are generally surprised, then someone has probably not been slowly escalating the way they should. And honestly, breaking play isn't such a great crime in a game if it's about being safe and just feeling like, whoa, okay, this is too much. So I think that if you use safe words or if you just say, whoa, not okay, that's not the whole world. The important thing is that you find some kinds of words to get the message through so that you don't end up in a scene you really don't want to be in. But of course, it also helps if the safe words are intuitive, if they are well workshopped. Yes, okay. Let's have...
We have 2 more questions.
Okay, do we have time?
Do those 2 and then normal.
Yes.
Okay, 2 more questions there is.
A question from Veronica. May you give more examples of flexible safe words?
I have not found any, actually. And for that reason, I think it's a bit unnecessary to come up with them. Because if we have something that always comes to mind in most people's heads, it's easier to make people use them. So there might be more out there. If any of you know any, please write them in the comments. But I haven't been able to come up with or find any more. Next.
Yes, they have something to do with each other. So in a recipe slide, a question from Tobias. What does only flexible check-ins mean? Can you give examples? Is it off game? How are you feeling? Or do you mean something else?
Exactly. Since this is my homemade typology, it's phrases that I try to explain. So flexible is basically using off game followed by the message instead of using another kind of safe word. So instead of using check-ins like green or color, you only check in by asking off game, how are you doing? Or off game, are you okay? So that is what I mean by that. And that is to avoid that situation where people just give the knee-jerk reply that is the good and right answer. So that is what I mean. Was that all the questions? Okay. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be safe. Be good.